The fire crackles at the center of the teepee, bright, alive, and dangerously close to the wooden poles that hold the entire structure together. Sparks leap upward, smoke twists toward the night sky, and yet the poles, dry, exposed, and ancient, do not burn. They stand firm, blackened but unbroken, generation after generation. To modern builders, this seems impossible. How could a structure made entirely of wood survive constant exposure to open flame, night after night, through wind, snow, and storm? How did Native American engineers design a home that could breathe fire and live? This is the untold story of the teepee's unsung heroes, the poles. Beyond their elegant symmetry lies a forgotten marvel of ancient science. Natural fireproof engineering that defied the limits of material and time. Imagine a home where the fire was not the enemy, but the heartbeat. Where every pole, every piece of bark, every breath of smoke worked together in perfect balance. For centuries, tribes like the Lakota, Blackfoot, and Cheyenne mastered a delicate chemistry. The art of choosing the right wood, preparing it with smoke and air, and shaping it so precisely that it could resist flames without a single nail, screw, or drop of modern chemical. They didn't need laboratories or blueprints. They had observation. Centuries of watching how wind carried heat, how wood aged under smoke, how the earth itself taught what could endure. Their structures weren't accidental. They were experiments, perfected by time. Before we continue, subscribe, because each day we uncover more of this hidden brilliance, where ancient engineering meets natural science, and where simplicity becomes genius. Tonight, we stand before one of humanity's quietest miracles, a home that burned every day and never turned to ash. Long before the teepee became a cultural icon, it was an engineering masterpiece, and at the heart of its design stood the poles. To most observers, they were just simple logs holding up hide or canvas, but to the people who built them, the poles were the soul of the structure. The skeleton, the breath, and the protectors of life. Each pole was chosen with deliberate care. Not all trees were equal. Builders sought straight, young trunks, strong yet flexible, that could bear the weight of hides and withstand storms. Lodgepole pine was often the tree of choice. Tall, resilient, and uniquely suited to endure both heat and cold. But its strength alone wasn't what made it extraordinary. The mystery lay in its relationship with fire. Inside the teepee, fire was more than warmth. It was community, ritual, and survival. And yet, that same flame licked constantly at the air just beneath the poles. Over generations, native builders learned how to harness that danger, not fear it. The poles were positioned in such a way that smoke and heat rose evenly, never allowing direct flame contact. The result was something astonishing. The very fires meant to destroy the structure instead preserved it. Each burn session hardened the outer layer of wood, sealing it against future damage. Over time, the poles grew darker, denser, and more resistant, fireproofed by the very element they housed. To call them poles barely captures their purpose. They were silent engineers, the meeting point between art and survival, where design met understanding. The teepee poles weren't fireproof by miracle, they were fireproof by science. Long before science had a name for it, native builders didn't stumble into safety. They engineered it through a perfect blend of biology, chemistry, and observation. The first secret lay in tree choice. Tribes often favored lodgepole pine, spruce, or cedar, woods with low sap content and tight grain. Unlike resin-heavy pines that ignite quickly, these varieties resisted combustion, smoldering rather than flaming. Their structure allowed heat to carbonize the surface slowly, forming a thin char layer that actually protected the interior from burning. Modern engineers now recognize this same effect in controlled wood charring, known as pyrolysis, a natural fire barrier created by the material itself. Then came the role of the sap. In certain climates, builders chose poles that had aged just long enough for most of the resin to dry out, leaving wood that was lighter, drier, and less volatile. Others intentionally smoked or partially scorched their poles during preparation, baking out flammable oils and sealing the grain with a thin coat of carbon. Nature's own insulation. The chemistry of smoke further enhanced this resistance. Over time, exposure to campfire smoke filled the teepee with natural creosotes and fine ash particles. These microscopic layers coated the poles, giving them additional protection from flame, mold, and insects. To the untrained eye, the poles might look weathered or blackened. To the native craftsman, that was perfection. It meant the wood had matured, strengthened, and become resilient through the very element it housed. Without chemicals, varnish, or machinery, they achieved what modern architects still strive for: a structure that thrived beside fire, not against it. Before a single pole was raised, the process of preparing it began, an ancient ritual that combined craftsmanship with environmental science. Native builders understood that raw wood was alive. It expanded, contracted, breathed, and burned if left untreated. So they developed methods to transform it, to cure, strengthen, and protect it through a process known simply as smoking. After harvesting young, straight trunks of lodgepole pine or cedar, builders stripped away bark and sapwood, then leaned them near small fires for days or even weeks. The smoke curled around the wood, saturating it with invisible minerals and natural resins that hardened its indicators. This smoked skin served as a carbon shield, reducing the pole's ability to ignite, while also repelling insects and rot. The heat from these slow fires didn't char the poles, it tempered them. Moisture was drawn out gradually, preventing cracking, while the outer surface darkened into a glossy, weatherproof shell. When complete, each pole was lighter, denser, and more stable than when it had been freshly cut. In some regions, poles were buried in ash or soil after smoking, a method that neutralized leftover oils and added a layer of fine minerals into the wood's pores. Over time, the poles developed a subtle sheen, a sign they were ready to face both fire and frost. The result was not just a structural component, but a living technology, self-maintaining, naturally preserved, and almost impossible to replicate with modern treatments. Through patience and precision, they turned simple logs into engineered pillars, proof that their science was built not in laboratories, but in observation, repetition, and respect for the elements. Even the most perfectly treated wood would fail without smart design. And that's where the true genius of the teepee emerged. Its architecture wasn't improvised. It was engineered to work with fire, airflow, and temperature. Every pole, every opening, and every angle was part of a natural ventilation system that kept the structure safe while allowing daily fires to burn inside. At the center of the teepee burned the hearth, a small, low fire carefully built to generate warmth without large flames. Above it, the poles converged into a conical peak, leaving an adjustable smoke hole at the top. This opening acted as a natural chimney, drawing heat upward and away from the structure. The rising, warm air created suction that pulled in cooler air from the base of the teepee, constantly feeding oxygen to the flame while pushing smoke and embers upward. The pole arrangement itself was critical. Each was placed at a precise angle, leaning inward but never directly over the fire. This geometry allowed heat to move in a circular flow, radiating warmth evenly but never focusing long enough on any single pole to cause ignition. Even when sparks leapt upward, they lost heat quickly in the rising air current, never reaching a temperature that could sustain flame. If charring did occur, it only strengthened the wood. The blackened layer acted like a shield, insulating the pole from further burning. It was self-protection through design. To modern architects, this is natural convection engineering. But to Native Americans, it was simply common sense born of observation. The teepee wasn't just a shelter. It was a breathing organism, one that lived in perfect balance between fire and air. Inside a teepee, the dance of fire, smoke, and air was not chaos. It was chemistry. Native builders didn't just create a home. They created an ecosystem that balanced temperature, oxygen, and combustion with astonishing precision. Their understanding of how elements interacted transformed the teepee from a shelter into a living, breathing structure of resilience. At the center, the fire burned low and steady, producing more smoke than flame. That smoke curled upward through the conical chamber, brushing across the poles as it rose. Over time, those soft plumes deposited microscopic layers of soot and natural creosote onto the wood. Far from being dirt or decay, this coating acted as insulation, sealing pores, reducing moisture absorption, and dramatically lowering the pole's ability to ignite. Heat played its part too. The teepee's shape caused warm air to spiral upward, creating convection currents that constantly cycled oxygen. This meant that even when fires burned through the coldest nights, flames stayed tamed, never touching the poles directly. The airflow fed the fire just enough to sustain it, while whisking away the most dangerous gases and embers. Air was the silent architect. Every flap, every seam, every opening at the top worked together to control draft and temperature. When the wind shifted, so did the smoke flaps. Simple adjustments that turned a humble dwelling into a precise ventilation system. Over time, this constant partnership of smoke, heat, and air didn't just protect the teepee, it strengthened it. The poles grew seasoned, their fibers sealed by decades of exposure, their surfaces hardened against both flame and frost. The teepee wasn't just built to withstand fire, it evolved with it. Each breath of smoke turning wood into wisdom and shelter into science. The fireproof nature of the teepee began long before a single pole was lifted. It began in the forest. The choice of tree was a decision rooted in generations of observation and understanding. Native builders didn't simply cut what was nearby. They selected what the land itself had prepared for endurance. Lodgepole pine was the favorite across many plains tribes, prized for its strength, flexibility, and straight growth. But beyond its shape, its natural chemistry made it uniquely resistant to fire. The resin within lodgepole pine was sparse and evenly distributed, unlike in resin-rich trees such as pitch pine that ignite easily. This meant the wood smoldered rather than flared, forming a protective char layer when exposed to heat. Nature's version of carbon armor. Other regions turned to spruce or cedar, each chosen for environmental reasons. Cedar, naturally filled with oils that repel moisture and insects, aged into dense, rot-resistant poles that resisted both decay and heat. Spruce, with its light structure and low sap content, reacted to fire with controlled charring rather than combustion. Even the environment where the trees grew mattered. Poles taken from high-altitude or wind-exposed forests developed tight growth rings. Fibers compressed so densely that flames found little oxygen to feed on. Builders often harvested trees during specific seasons, when sap flow was minimal and moisture balance optimal, reducing volatility before treatment ever began. Every detail, from soil composition to the time of harvest, was part of an unwritten formula. The forest wasn't a resource, it was a collaborator. Through these choices, the teepee's fireproof engineering began long before smoke ever touched the wood. The land itself provided the blueprint, and those who listened closely enough turned its patterns into protection. For the Native Americans who built teepees, fire was more than warmth. It was preservation. The same smoke that hardened poles against flames also became the secret to making them nearly immortal. The teepee's interior fire didn't just heat the space, it continuously weatherproofed it, sealing wood fibers and hides in a layer of protection that few modern materials can match. Every night, thin veils of smoke rose through the teepee and wrapped around the poles, depositing a mix of carbon and organic compounds. These invisible coatings filled microscopic cracks, closing pores in the wood and forming a barrier against rain and humidity. Over time, the poles became seasoned, no longer vulnerable to warping, swelling, or rot. The same process that made them resistant to burning also made them resistant to decay. Smoke acted like ancient varnish, infusing the wood with natural oils and preserving agents released from burning plants and bark. It repelled insects and fungi, which would otherwise eat away at untreated wood. The heat dried the poles consistently, preventing moisture from seeping in and freezing, one of the main causes of wood splitting in cold climates. This constant smoking was no accident. Builders understood that a well-used teepee aged beautifully. The darker its poles grew, the stronger they became, each year layering more protection upon the last. The result was a structure that thrived through wind, rain, and snow, aging not into weakness, but into resilience. What modern science calls thermal curing, they achieved naturally. Every night, through ritual and rhythm. Fire preserved the teepee from both flame and time. To the Native Americans who lived within the teepee, its poles were not just beams of wood. They were symbols of connection, carrying deep spiritual meaning that bound the physical and sacred together. The fire at the center represented life, spirit, and transformation. The poles surrounding it stood as living witnesses to that power, guardians that held balance between destruction and creation. Each pole symbolized an element of the world, direction, season, or virtue. The Lakota, for example, viewed the 12 or more poles as extensions of prayer, each representing aspects of life, understanding, strength, kinship, and protection. Together, they formed a sacred circle, unity held in balance by the fire's heart. When flames rose, the smoke that drifted upward was believed to carry prayers to the Great Spirit. This spiritual understanding also mirrored physical truth. Fire purified, smoke sanctified, and the poles, touched daily by both, became sacred tools of endurance. They were not dead wood, but living participants in ceremony. Every time a teepee was assembled, it was an act of reverence, not construction, but renewal. When families gathered inside, they didn't just share warmth. They shared communion with the elements. The fire at the center burned carefully, not to consume, but to coexist. Its glow reflected on the darkened poles, tracing the marks of years. A visual story of survival, ritual, and gratitude. The interplay between fire and pole became a living metaphor. Heat could destroy or protect, depending on how it was honored. That was the heart of native engineering, respect as a form of design. Their structures were sacred geometry, where spirit and science met, and survival was both a prayer and a masterpiece. Modern architects study airflow, material chemistry, and insulation, yet the teepee had mastered all three centuries ago. The fireproof design of its poles and the living structure that surrounded them revealed principles that modern engineering still strives to perfect. Sustainability, adaptability, and harmony between human life and nature. At its core, the teepee demonstrated passive design at its finest. It used no metal, no synthetic coating, and no energy input beyond fire and air, yet maintained safe indoor temperatures through seasons of extreme cold and heat. Its natural ventilation system worked more efficiently than many modern chimneys, while its smoked poles showed how long-term, low-temperature treatment could transform organic material into something stronger and safer. Engineers today mimic these same processes, charring wood surfaces to increase fire resistance, known as shosugiban in Japanese architecture, mirrors the ancient smoke-curing techniques of native builders. Sustainable architects now study how the teepee's aerodynamic shape dispersed heat, deflected wind, and maintained structural integrity under stress, all while using biodegradable, renewable materials. But perhaps the most powerful lesson lies beyond the physics. The teepee's fireproof engineering wasn't born from conquest of nature. It emerged from partnership. Modern innovation often seeks to dominate the elements. The teepee proved that understanding them achieves more. Fire, treated as teacher rather than enemy, became the force that strengthened the home. If modern cities were built with such principles, balancing comfort, safety, and ecological respect, our homes would not only protect us, but coexist with the planet itself. What ancient tribes built with instinct, today's engineers are only beginning to rediscover. That the smartest designs are the ones that listen to the earth first. The legacy of the teepee's fireproof poles lives far beyond the plains. It echoes in every design that seeks harmony between human need and nature's law. What began as the shelter of nomadic tribes has become a blueprint for sustainable living. A reminder that progress does not always mean invention. Sometimes it means remembrance. Architects and engineers around the world now study the teepee as an example of ecological design, perfected long before the age of machines. Its poles, smoke-cured and flame-tempered, proved that longevity could be achieved without chemicals, metal, or electricity. Its shape, aerodynamic, self-ventilating, and heat-efficient, informal modern green architecture, from passive homes to disaster-resistant shelters. Even beyond engineering, the teepee remains a teacher of perspective. It shows that safety and simplicity are not opposites. It shows that intelligence lies not in domination, but in listening. To the forest that gave the poles, to the wind that shaped them, to the fire that tested them, and to the people who honored them. Each pole, once cut and carried by hand, carried within it generations of learning. The study of seasons, the language of trees, the rhythm of survival. Their fireproof strength was never accidental. It was earned through patience and humility. Today, as our buildings grow taller and our tools more complex, the teepee still whispers an older wisdom, that technology means nothing without respect for the elements that built us. Its poles were more than structure. They were symbols of unity, standing between fire and sky, teaching humanity the simplest law of endurance. When you work with nature, not against it, even wood can stand beside flame and never burn. As the night deepens and the last sparks fade, the teepee stands silent, its poles dark, gleaming, and untouched by flame. What once seemed impossible now feels like truth, that fire, when respected, does not destroy, it transforms. The genius of Native American builders wasn't hidden in tools or materials. It was in their relationship with the earth. They understood what we've nearly forgotten, that survival and design begin with listening. Every pole raised beneath the stars carried a dialogue with the elements. Wood that knew the forest's rhythm, smoke that taught patience, heat that shaped endurance. Their fireproof engineering was not an invention, it was an understanding. Modern science names the processes: convection, carbonization, thermodynamics, but their ancestors lived them long before equations existed. The teepee was not a structure born from trial and error. It was born from communion, from centuries of observation turned into effortless wisdom. If there's one lesson these poles still teach, it's that strength and humility can coexist. A home can be both fragile and eternal. Its safety found not in resistance, but in harmony. Subscribe now, because each day we uncover more of this ancient brilliance. Forgotten sciences that reveal just how much humanity once knew about balance, design, and resilience. The teepee poles remind us of the oldest engineering truth of all, that the best structures are not those that fight nature, but those that breathe with it. And when you understand that, you see it clearly. The teepee never feared the fire. It danced with it.